The final layer of the thunder domain was always shrouded in a dim light, with the black thunder river hanging from the sky. The low rumble of thunder echoed relentlessly throughout the space. In the endless sea of thunder, a thin figure sat cross-legged in stillness. Around him, massive black divine lightning would constantly rush toward him, crashing fiercely into his body. With each strike, his body trembled violently, his skin scorched black. Yet compared to the chaotic scene from before, where he was flung about uncontrollably, he seemed to have endured far better this time. The North Abyss dragon Xun'er hovered in the sky, observing the scene. He nodded slightly. After 10 days of relentless bombardment, Chen seemed to be gradually adapting. Though the pain within him had not lessened much, he had endured it. The North Abyss dragon Xun'er could also sense that every time a layer of charred skin peeled off Chen, his was becoming a little stronger. However, facing the tempering of the black divine lightning, it seemed that the enhancements should not stop there. Each bolt of black divine lightning contained immense power and spiritual energy, yet there were no outward signs of these energies within Chen's body. This was clearly not what he expected. This little guy is intentionally suppressing the power within? The North Abyss dragon Xun'er's eyes flashed, and a look of interest crossed his ancient face. He muttered, "Truly a perceptive young one. Planning to achieve a breakthrough with a burst of power after accumulating it?" According to the North Abyss dragon Xun'er's calculations, Chen should have been gradually increasing his strength through the constant tempering of the black divine lightning. However, from what he saw now, Chen had chosen a different approach. He had suppressed all the absorbed power within his body, accumulating it. While these energies might seem insignificant when scattered, once they gathered to a certain level, they would explode with the force of a flood, revealing an astonishing power. Training the Thunder God body was exceedingly difficult. Even with the natural training ground provided by this Thunder Sea, advancing from the Two-rune Thunder body to the Four-rune Thunder body was no simple feat if one followed the normal method. It might take half a year, and still, they might not reach that stage. It seemed Chen understood this, and thus, he chose a different approach, accumulating power before unleashing it all at once. He was suppressing all the energy within him, much like a teapot filled with boiling water, tightly sealed to prevent the steam from escaping. But such a seal could only last temporarily. Once it reached a breaking point, the resulting eruption would be terrifying. Right now, Chen was accumulating that explosive force, and once the time came, he might soar to new heights. It was an excellent plan, but it came at a price. Chen's body was probably like a ticking time bomb, and if he lost control, the consequences would be catastrophic. The North Abyss dragon Xun'er sighed helplessly. This little guy really made it hard for him to relax. It seemed he would have to keep a close watch on him, in case anything went wrong, and he would have to step in immediately. Boom! As the North Abyss dragon Xun'er sighed, the black divine lightning continued to strike from the Thunder Sea, relentlessly crashing down on Chen's figure. With each strike, the power gradually condensed, and time quietly passed in this arduous and monotonous training. During this time, the Northern Sky Spirit Academy fell into a special kind of stillness. The top 10 figures on the heavenly ranking had all entered closed-door seclusion, and with their absence, the entire academy seemed much quieter. However, beneath this tranquility, there was a tense atmosphere. Many students were intensively cultivating, as the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition was approaching. Though some might not be qualified to participate, they were well aware of the current situation at the academy. In the past few years, the Northern Sky Spirit Academy had performed poorly in the grand competition. Among the 5 great academies, they had placed last, and some of the top academies were eyeing them, attempting to take their place. However, even so, this does not hinder their feelings toward the North Song Spiritual Academy. Although there are countless spiritual academies in the Great Thousand Worlds, few can make people feel such a strong sense of belonging as the North Song Spiritual Academy. Of course, this might be due to the academy having a great dean. The words spoken by Dean Tidesong back then clearly moved many of the students. A dean who could say that no matter what happens in the future, as long as you return to the North Song Spiritual Academy, it will always be your backing, is still rare in this vast world. Everyone knew that the top 10 figures on the heavenly ranking were all in seclusion, preparing for the upcoming Spiritual Academy Grand Competition. They were preparing to fight for the glory of the North Song Spiritual Academy, so naturally, they could not fall behind. Perhaps sensing the atmosphere within the academy, the higher-ups of the academy also made an announcement. Any student who could reach the heaven-reaching stage would qualify to enter the North Song Gate. This news spread quickly, causing the previously quiet North Song Spiritual Academy to once again stir. Countless talented students, their eyes red with ambition, began to travel back and forth between the Thunder Domain and the various spirit-gathering arrays, seizing every second to cultivate in hopes of reaching the heaven-reaching stage and qualifying for training at the North Song Gate. Under this encouragement, there were indeed impressive results. After all, the North Song Spiritual Academy was not lacking in talent. Some senior students had already reached the late stage of the transformation stage. They only needed to take that final step to break through into the heaven-reaching stage. Thus, in just 2 short months, some outstanding students who had been cultivating for years began to make breakthroughs, which further boosted the Academy's cultivation atmosphere. As the atmosphere in the North Song Spiritual Academy heated up, the deepest level of the Thunder Domain still remained dark and ominous, with thunder constantly rumbling. In the Thunder Sea, Mu Chen sat quietly, his body covered with arcs of black lightning flashing madly. They continuously emerged from his pores, and an indescribable, violent force faintly emanated, causing the surrounding thunder liquid to bubble wildly. Everyone could sense how massive the power was accumulating inside Mu Chen. Boom! In the Thunder Sea, the black divine lightning continued to howl and strike Mu Chen's body, setting off a storm of thunder and lightning. Mu Chen's body trembled slightly as he desperately absorbed the power of the black divine lightning and the immense spiritual energy. However, his brow furrowed slightly, as the feeling of an impending explosion had yet to come. Still not enough. The North Abyss Dragon Kuan stood with his hands behind his back, observing the scene where Mu Chen was almost consumed by the black lightning. His brows also furrowed. It had been 3 whole months, but the power Mu Chen had accumulated still hadn't reached the point of critical mass. Although if he were to explode now, Mu Chen's strength and Thunder God body would certainly increase, but clearly, the level of improvement would not be satisfactory. After 3 months of adapting, Mu Chen had already developed some resistance to the black divine lightning. Since that's the case, let's give you something even more powerful. A smile appeared on the aged face of the North Abyss Dragon Kuan. With a wave of his sleeve, a deep roar echoed from the depths of the Thunder Sea, and the thunder liquid rippled. A giant black dragon slowly emerged from the dark sea floor. This giant dragon was covered in lightning, its enormous body exuding a cold and formidable gleam. This black giant dragon was none other than the thunder spirit that had once existed in this Thunder Sea, now sealed by the North Abyss Dragon Kuan. Thus, its form had changed in response to the North Abyss Dragon Kuan's will. The thunder spirit glared with its huge eyes at Mu Chen, who was seated in the Thunder Sea. It then opened its massive jaws and let out a fearsome roar. Boom! A massive pillar of thunder liquid shot out from the thunder spirit's mouth, tearing through the Thunder Sea and smashing into Mu Chen's body. Sizzle! Mu Chen's body shook violently, black lightning flashing all over him. Tiny blood cracks appeared on his skin, caused by his physical body struggling to withstand the immense power within him. However, despite this, Mu Chen showed no intention of stopping. Instead, he continued to wildly absorb the vast power contained within the thunder liquid. He had been suppressed and tortured for a full 3 months, and he had no intention of simply giving in so easily. The North Abyss Dragon Kuan stared fixedly at Mu Chen, his gaze lingering on the bloodlines spreading across the surface of Mu Chen's body. His expression grew somewhat serious. This kid's appetite is really not small, but doesn't he fear he might overdo it and end up destroying himself? Should he continue? Furrowing his brow, North Abyss Dragon Kuan shook his head helplessly. Forget it. This kid doesn't seem reckless. Since he's willing to take this risk, he must understand the dangers. For now, I'll help him as much as I can. With that thought, North Abyss Dragon Kuan no longer hesitated. He flicked his finger, and the thunder spirit roared once more. A bolt of thunder, infused with immense power, shot out, enveloping Mu Chen's body. Sizzle. Bloodlines spread rapidly across his body. From a distance, Mu Chen appeared like a fragile porcelain doll, about to shatter, causing those who looked on to feel a chill down their spines. Crack. A faint cracking sound suddenly echoed. North Abyss Dragon Kuin's pupils shrank sharply. Crack. The barely audible sound of something breaking could almost go unnoticed amidst the thunderous roars of the Thunder Sea. However, the moment it occurred, North Abyss Dragon Kuin's face turned grim, his body tense as if frozen. His gaze pierced through the layers of thunder, locking onto the lean figure before him. Boom! A violent, overwhelming wave of energy erupted from the position of that body covered in bloodlines. Black lightning began to emanate from the bloodlines within the boy's body, spreading over his entire form. A powerful thunderous aura surged forth from those bloodlines. His body seemed as though it was on the verge of collapse. Whoosh! Mu Chen's eyes suddenly snapped open. His hands formed a seal, and a loud shout echoed, like a thunderclap. The surrounding thunderous energy was violently torn apart by his shout, creating a vast vacuum zone of 1,000 feet around him, preventing anything from approaching. Black arcs of lightning danced wildly across his body, and these arcs gathered together, transforming into a massive thunderstorm behind him. Is the black divine thunder power within him too strong? North Abyss Dragon Kuin's eyes fixed on the scene. From what he could see, Mu Chen's body seemed to be unable to withstand the terrifying power he had accumulated within it. If he continued forcing it, his body might shatter. At this moment, Mu Chen clearly understood his own situation. His expression became solemn. His hand seals changed rapidly, and black lightning began to stir beneath his skin. On his chest, 2 thunder patterns manifested, and a third lightning mark began to form, showing signs of condensing into a new thunder pattern. Clearly, Mu Chen was attempting to break through. Sizzle. The increasingly violent black lightning arcs surged from Mu Chen's body. From a distance, it seemed as if he were wrapped entirely in these arcs of lightning, which flickered wildly. Eventually, they transformed into bolts of thunder, entering the third thunder pattern on Mu Chen's chest. As the power of the black divine thunder flowed in, the third thunder pattern slowly began to take shape. As the third thunder pattern solidified, Mu Chen's skin darkened, exuding an icy, unyielding hardness, as if nothing in the world could shatter it. In its coldness, there was an indescribable aura of overpowering strength. Mu Chen's body also seemed to rise slightly. The formation of the third thunder pattern wasn't difficult. The black divine thunder energy he had accumulated for 3 months was finally being put to use, with a continuous flow of power entering, causing the thunder pattern to grow ever more lifelike, like true thunder itself. This process continued for about 10 minutes. When the last black arc of lightning vanished from his body's surface, the third thunder pattern on Mu Chen's chest had fully formed. At that moment, the bloodlines on his body disappeared, and a powerful, unmatchable energy wave rippled outward. Have you reached the Three-rune thunder body? The North Abyss Dragon Kuin narrowed his eyes slightly. In just 3 months, such progress was actually quite impressive. He had previously mentioned that he wanted Mu Chen to reach the Four-rune thunder body within half a year, but that had been somewhat boastful. After all, he was well aware of the difficulty involved in cultivating the thunder god body. Body forging was already tough, let alone the thunder god body, which was not an ordinary technique. Just as the North Abyss Dragon Kuin was mulling over this, his expression suddenly shifted. He noticed that when the third thunder rune condensed, Mu Chen still showed no signs of stopping. The young man pressed his lips together, and his handsome face, marked by 3 months of intense training, had a few scruffy stubbles. Yet this only made him appear even more resolute. His hands joined together, and the seal he formed was once again the thunder god body's hand sign. Ha! A low shout echoed from his mouth, and the thunderstorm behind him spread out, enveloping his body. Massive bolts of lightning rained down, relentlessly striking Mu Chen's body. As the lightning struck Mu Chen's chest, where the third thunder rune resided, started to gather a faint light. He was actually trying to condense the fourth thunder rune in one go. Was this his plan all along? The North Abyss Dragon Kuin murmured to himself. Boom. The black thunderstorm outside Mu Chen's body spun wildly, drawing the black divine lightning force from the Thunder Sea. It then surged into Mu Chen's body. This infusion was extremely forceful. If Mu Chen hadn't endured relentless lightning strikes for the past 3 months, he likely wouldn't have dared to accept this brutal infusion. But even now, his body felt as though it was on the verge of being melted. The intense burning pain was like it was tearing apart his very flesh. In such a moment, there was only one thing to do. Grit his teeth and endure. More and more of the black divine lightning surged towards him. However, condensing the fourth thunder rune was clearly 100 times more difficult than the third. Even with the overwhelming black divine lightning pouring in, it barely caused the rune to expand halfway, let alone completely condense. This result made a trace of frustration flash in Mu Chen's eyes. He hadn't expected that 3 months of accumulation wouldn't even be enough to fully form the fourth thunder rune. The Thunder God body was indeed a challenging cultivation path. Such a reckless child, the North Abyss Dragon Kuin muttered helplessly, shaking his head. Help someone to the end. Huh? Since your mother helped our North Song Spiritual Academy, I'll help you once more. As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his finger, and the thunder spirit deep within the Thunder Sea suddenly roared. It seemed to have received some command, but it was extremely reluctant, struggling to break free from control. Humph! The North Abyss Dragon Kuin sneered coldly. Suddenly, dark feathers sprouted from the massive body of the Thunder Spirit. These feathers sank deep into its body as if taking root. Black radiance surged, causing it to release an earth-shaking roar, as though in excruciating pain. After struggling for a while, it finally grew quiet, and with a final roar, a burst of black lightning shot out from its head. This streak of lightning looked like a droplet of liquid, but within it seemed to be a world of thunder, crackling with violent lightning. Whoosh! The drop of black lightning swiftly passed through the Thunder Sea, cutting through the thunderstorm around Mu Chen's body before plunging straight into his forehead. Mu Chen's body suddenly stiffened, and black lightning surged out from his brow at an astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, it spread throughout his body. From a distance, it looked as if his body was entangled by dark vines, giving it an eerie appearance. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, his body erupted, and clouds of blood mist rose. His face twisted in agony, clearly enduring immense pain. As the blood mist enveloped his body, the black lightning coursing through him contracted towards the fourth thunder rune on his chest. It seemed to carry an unbelievably powerful black divine lightning force. To everyone's shock, the difficult-to-condense thunder rune rapidly began to expand. Mu Chen's body continued to explode, more and more blood mist filling the air. Eventually, it formed a thick blood cocoon, completely enclosing his body within. Mu Chen sat quietly in the Thunder Sea, his body surrounded by a radius of dozens of yards where no thunderous energy could approach. His breath seemed to weaken, as though he had become completely still, with no movement whatsoever. The North Abyss Dragon Kuin stood with its hands behind its back, silently observing, showing no signs of action, just waiting patiently. This waiting lasted for 5 full days. During these 5 days, the blood cocoon enveloping Mu Chen showed no signs of change. The body within remained completely still, appearing as if it had lost all vitality. Yet the North Abyss Dragon Kuin still did not act. Its gaze lowered, and at a certain moment, its eyes subtly shifted. SSS. In the Thunder Sea, it seemed as though a section of the blood cocoon quietly slipped away. However, like a chain reaction, pieces of the blood cocoon rapidly fell off and turned to dust, scattering into the air. Underneath the falling blood cocoon was a tall and upright figure. The young man opened his eyes, and black thunderbolts flickered within his black pupils, sharp and fierce, making it impossible to look directly at them. He slowly stood up, his black hair flowing. He then looked down, where 4 thunder runes lightly flickered on his chest. These vivid runes were like the most perfect arcs of thunder in the world, radiating an impeccable sense of power, like the might of the heavens. For thunder runes. Four-rune thunder body. Mu Chen gazed at the 4 thunder runes, his palms slowly clenching. The overwhelming power surged within him, like a torrent of floodwater, flowing endlessly. It was a sense of power like never before. Now, Mu Chen had absolute confidence that with this body alone, he could clash head-on with any expert who had overcome the body tribulation. The power was simply intoxicating. Mu Chen's lips curled into a smile, and finally, unable to resist, he spread his arms wide and let out a long howl, the sound echoing like thunder. The howl created a massive wave in the thunder sea, and the thunder roared wildly, gathering behind the young man. At this moment, he appeared as if a thunder god had descended. The 3 months of hard cultivation had finally paid off. Boom! The black thunder sea churned continuously, and the sound of thunder echoed throughout the space, as if even the very fabric of space was trembling. Whoosh! Suddenly, the black thunder sea was torn apart, and a figure of lightning shot out, hovering in the air above the sea. The enormous black divine lightning roared as it struck the figure, unleashing countless bolts of thunder. However, the figure spread its arms wide and seemed extremely intoxicated by the sensation. At the moment the thunder god body reached the 4-rune level, Mu Chen's resistance to the black divine lightning had significantly increased. He no longer suffered the same chaos as before. Even the violent black divine lightning's power invading his body now only brought a tingling sensation, which felt incredibly comfortable. Huff! Mu Chen lowered his arms and exhaled a puff of white air, which even shimmered with lightning. A grin of excitement spread across his face. The 4-rune thunder body was indeed much stronger than the 2-rune thunder body. He looked up and gazed toward the distant North Abyss Dragon Xun'er, his figure moving and rushing over. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er glanced at Mu Chen and showed a satisfied smile. 3 months' time to advance the thunder god body from 2-rune to 4-rune was already a good pace. Thank you, Senior North Abyss, Mu Chen said respectfully, cupping his hands. He knew that without the help of the North Abyss Dragon Xun'er, it would have taken at least twice as long to achieve this. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er waved his hand. After all, you're going to represent our Northern Sky Spirit Academy in the Academy Grand Tournament. I naturally couldn't hold back. I'll help as much as I can. At this point, he paused and glanced at Mu Chen. However, in these 3 months, I can only help you elevate your Thunder God body to this extent. As for your own spiritual energy cultivation, it hasn't improved much. Mu Chen nodded. During these 3 months, he had mainly focused on cultivating the Thunder God body. While his spiritual energy had improved slightly, it wasn't as astounding as the progress with the Thunder God body. But he was very satisfied, considering the short 3 months. He couldn't have balanced both aspects. One had to be the primary focus. With 3 months left before the half-year period, I'll devote the remaining time to cultivating spiritual energy and raising my level, Mu Chen smiled. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er nodded. Yes, but I won't guide you for the next 3 months. Go to a different place now. For the next 3 months, you'll be under someone else's guidance. Someone else? Mu Chen was surprised. The last 3 months will be under the guidance of Elder Ling Shi. Just follow her. She said that if you train with her, your strength will increase drastically over these 3 months. The North Abyss Dragon Xun'er chuckled and added, training with her is definitely better than training with an old, boring guy like me. She's a young, beautiful lady, and she's very close to you. Make sure to take advantage of that. I've never seen Ling Shi so dedicated to a boy before. Mu Chen's face was filled with awkwardness. What kind of statement was that? All right, you can go now. I need to enter seclusion for a while, said the North Abyss Dragon Xun'er, standing with his hands behind his back. His aged face seemed to shimmer with a faint glow, and his eyes were sharp, as if they could pierce through space itself, giving off an indescribable sense of immense power. Mu Chen was moved, his heart stirred. He cautiously asked, Senior North Abyss, are you about a breakthrough? Clearly in a good mood, North Abyss Dragon Xun'er smiled and nodded. I've been at this level for many years. Thanks to you helping me obtain the Thunder God Pill, and after preparing for half a year, It's finally time to attempt a breakthrough. Mu Chun clicked his tongue. If North Abyss Dragon Kuan succeeded in breaking through, he would become a true Earth Supreme. At this level, he would be a dominant force across the Great Thousand Worlds. After all, even the powerful Luo God clan, with Luo Tian God, the grandfather of Luo Li, was only an Earth Supreme. Yet, even with that strength, the Luo God clan could still survive amidst the constant pressure from the three great divine clans. This demonstrated just how powerful this level of strength could be. The difference between a 9th grade Supreme and an Earth Supreme might seem small, but it was worlds apart. Had North Abyss Dragon Kuan reached the Earth Supreme level earlier, even if the Dragon Demon Palace had 100 more guts, they wouldn't dare to provoke the North Song Spiritual Academy. The so-called Wu Liang ancestor wouldn't even dare to step onto the North Song continent. Then I'll wish Senior North Abyss success in breaking through, Mu Chun said with a cupped fist and a respectful tone. North Abyss Dragon Kuan smiled and nodded. With a wave of his sleeve, the space around him twisted and was torn open, forming a passage leading to the North Song Spiritual Academy. Mu Chun saw this and didn't want to disturb him any further. He turned and stepped into the distorted space. As the spatial fluctuations grew chaotic, his figure completely vanished. North Abyss Dragon Kuan watched as Mu Chun disappeared, and his expression slowly grew solemn. He clenched his palm, and a smooth Thunder God pill appeared in his hand. The pill was pitch black, filled with lightning, as though it was transforming into a world of thunder, profound and mysterious. Boom! As the Thunder God pill appeared, the final layer of the Thunder domain was immediately filled with lightning, as countless bolts of thunder split the sky, turning the dim space into daylight. Roar! A roar came from deep within the Thunder Sea, as the Thunder Spirit seemed to sense the Thunder God pill. North Abyss Dragon Kuan cast a faint glance towards the Thunder Sea's depths before retracting his gaze. His body rippled with dark light, and his form began to distort, rapidly expanding. In just a few breaths, his body transformed into a giant, a creature of unimaginable size. This creature was entirely pitch black, resembling neither a fish nor a dragon. Its wings spread wide, like the wings of a hanging cloud, almost covering half of the space. The Thunder God pill shot into the sky, and North Abyss Dragon Kuan opened his massive mouth. Like a giant whale sucking in water, the Thunder God pill, accompanied by endless lightning, plunged down, only to be completely swallowed by his enormous jaws. Boom! Boom! As the Thunder God pill entered his body, North Abyss Dragon Kuan's giant form leaped forward, charging deep into the Thunder Sea. The entire space seemed to go mad, as the Thunder Sea churned and waves soared tens of thousands of feet high. The space itself seemed to be on the verge of destruction, with a terrifying momentum. An astonishing breakthrough was silently brewing deep within the Thunder Sea. After entering the spatial passage, Mu Chun naturally had no idea about the earth-shaking movements that occurred in the Thunder domain after his departure. Even if he had known, he wouldn't have been able to offer any help. Such a breakthrough could only rely on oneself. There was nothing he could do except pray for North Abyss Dragon Kuan's success. Above the North Song Spiritual Academy, space twisted, and Mu Chun reappeared. He looked at the blue sky, saw the spirit beasts flying across the horizon, and listened to the lively sounds from the academy. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Every time he emerged from the Thunder domain, it felt like seeing the light of day again. That place was too oppressive, but it had to be said that it was indeed an excellent place for cultivation. Suspended in midair, Mu Chun scanned his surroundings, thought for a moment, and then made his way toward the mountain where Ling Shi resided. Given that Luo Li and the others were still cultivating within the North Song Gate, there was no need for him to return to the freshman district. Several minutes later, Mu Chun had already descended from the quiet mountain peak. This was Ling Shi's secluded dwelling, a place that not only students dared not approach, but even some high-ranking members of the Spirit Academy rarely visited. After all, they all knew Ling Shi's cold and indifferent nature. Even the Dean Taitsong didn't dare to offend her much, let alone them. And yet, they could say nothing about it. Ling Shi's strength was unquestionable. Throughout the entire North Song Spirit Academy, Aside from the North Abyss Dragon Kuin and Dean Song, perhaps even the 5 heavenly seed elders would not stand a chance against her. So, she had every right to act in such an aloof manner. Mu Chen descended the mountain and quietly walked into the courtyard. With a glance, he saw the young girl in a white dress sitting before the bamboo house. The girl had a slender and graceful figure. Under the white dress, her delicate chest was firm, and her small waist was slender. Her features were as beautiful as a painting, but her face had a cold, detached expression. At this moment, she held an ancient book in one hand, while the other hand lightly coiled her long hair. This scene looked like a painting, leaving Mu Chen slightly dazed for a moment. Who would have thought that the third strongest person in the North Song Spirit Academy would be such a beautiful and young girl? What's wrong? Staring in a daze? Just as Mu Chen was lost in thought, a clear, pleasant voice came from the front. Ling Shi had already lifted her gaze from the ancient book, raised her delicate face, and smiled slightly at Mu Chen. At that moment, the coldness on her face seemed to melt away, and her red lips curled into a subtle smile that was almost breathtaking. Mu Chen scratched his head and smiled. Ling Shi, you're becoming more beautiful by the day. Can you be more beautiful than your little girlfriend? Ling Shi teased. Mu Chen grinned and walked closer. Lord North Abyss asked you to guide me in my cultivation from here on out. Ling Shi nodded lightly and beckoned for him to sit beside her. Then, she rested her jade hand on her cheek and quietly gazed at Mu Chen's handsome face. Mu Chen felt a little awkward under her gaze, his eyes wandering. Ling Shi smiled, shook her head, and extended her cool jade hand to gently touch his face. After 3 months of focused cultivation, Mu Chen's face had grown as stubble, causing the youthful softness to fade and replaced with a rugged, masculine edge. Mu Chen was slightly stunned when her cold hand touched his face. Then, he stiffened as he saw a sharp small knife appear at the tip of Ling Shi's slender fingers. Ling Shi? Before he could instinctively retreat, Ling Shi had already moved closer. The fragrance of her body filled the air, and her beautiful eyes, gleaming with a hint of water, looked into his. The sharp blade lightly scraped across Mu Chen's face, removing the messy stubble. Mu Chen froze. As he gazed at her near-perfect face, her serious expression stirred his heart. In that moment, Ling Shi truly felt like a sister to him. The area in front of the bamboo house was shaded by greenery. A light breeze blew through, and the green leaves fluttered down, landing softly on the bodies of the boy and girl. Ling Shi didn't mind the leaves falling on her, her focus entirely on helping Mu Chen clear the stubble from his face. The cool blade passed over his skin, sending a slight chill through him, but the sight of Ling Shi's concentrated face filled him with warmth. Once the last trace of the blade had passed over his face, Ling Shi looked at the young man's now smooth and handsome face, nodded in satisfaction, and smiled gently. Not paying attention to your appearance might suit you, but I prefer things to be a bit cleaner. Mu Chen scratched his head, laughing. Ling Shi, if you didn't have such a cold expression and smiled like this all the time, I wonder how many people would be utterly captivated by you. Flattery, Ling Shi smiled, retracting the blade and pulling her hand away from Mu Chen's face. Her long fingers gently curled, and the warmth from her touch lingered on his skin. Her eyes flickered, and her beautiful lashes lowered slightly. Ling Shi, what's the plan for my training from here on out? Mu Chen asked curiously. He had only 3 months left, and during this time, he needed to focus all his energy on cultivating his spiritual power. After all, no matter how many techniques he had, spiritual energy was fundamental. Without powerful spiritual energy, no matter how strong his techniques were, they would be useless, like trying to cook without rice. My spiritual energy can help nourish your own, Ling Shi said, her gaze focused on the leaves beneath her feet. Mu Chen immediately gave an awkward laugh. Ling Shi, please don't joke around. I wouldn't dare to use that method. If my mother finds out, she'd probably kill me. Ling Shi tilted her head slightly. Her long, silky hair cascaded down, partially covering her smooth profile. She spoke softly, it's actually not that bad. Those who cultivate the great pagoda art scroll in that clan are usually low-ranking servants. Her voice grew softer and softer, as she could sense the smile on the young man's face beside her slowly fading. Chen quietly looked at the girl in the white dress beside him. Her long legs were slightly curled, her delicate body looking fragile, even with a faint trembling. There was a sense of confusion swirling in her eyes. "Senior Lingxi, are you doubting that my mother asked you to practice the great pagoda art in scroll, just to make you my attendant?" Chen said slowly. Lingxi's body jerked in shock. She suddenly lifted her head, staring at Chen with panic, shaking her head in disbelief. Her eyes were filled with a heart-wrenching fear. "No, I would never doubt Aunt Jing. If it weren't for Aunt Jing, I would have died long ago in that cold, rainy day. If it weren't for her giving me a reason to live, even if I had survived, I would have been a walking corpse." Aunt Jing was the pillar of her cold, lifeless existence. She would rather destroy herself than doubt her. For a person to survive, they need faith. That faith could be hatred, protection, or something else. For Lingxi, her faith over the years was that warm figure who led her out of the cold, hopeless place of death. So, if that faith were to collapse, she might truly lose the drive to move forward and become like a walking corpse. That, for her, would be even harder to accept than death. Chen looked at the panicked Lingxi, reached out, and gently grasped her icy jade hand, whispering, "Senior Lingxi, there are many things in this world that we can't clearly explain. And when our eyes can't provide us with answers, we must judge with our hearts. Do you think my mother would deceive you?" Lingxi froze for a moment, then gently shook her head. The movement was small, but firm and unwavering. She had been with Aunt Jing for so many years, and although her memories were now sealed, the deep feelings from her heart were genuine. "Ah." Chen smiled slightly and said, "So, it seems like you're jealous of me." Lingxi looked at him in shock, then instinctively pouted her lips and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? It's because you care so much about my mother. When you saw me reunite with her earlier, it seemed like her emotions fluctuated too much, and then you began to think that Aunt Jing's real favorite is her biological son. That made you feel a bit lost, fearful, and then you started overthinking, saying all these things. It was like your emotions weren't quite right." Chen looked at Lingxi's increasingly flushed face and smiled. "Is it that ever since we returned from the North Song continent, you've been worrying about this?" Lingxi's face turned completely red. Her jade hand clenched tightly, and she looked into the boy's bright, somewhat teasing eyes. For a moment, she felt guilty, unsure whether Chen was right. She couldn't deny that since returning from the North Song continent, she had been feeling a bit down. "I'm sorry," Lingxi lowered her head. Chen was Aunt Jing's biological son, and it was natural that she would have the deepest feelings for him. It made no sense for her to be so unreasonable. Chen shook his head. He understood. In the past, when Aunt Jing and Lingxi were together, Aunt Jing had never mentioned him, so Lingxi didn't even know she had a son. Moreover, since Lingxi treated Aunt Jing as her belief, it was natural for her to think their bond was the strongest. But now, he had suddenly appeared, and he was Aunt Jing's biological child. That connection had the bloodline continuation, something Lingxi couldn't easily comprehend. This was why she felt the way she did, because she cared so much that she became insecure. Lingxi was clearly trying to suppress these emotions, but when their conversation touched on sensitive matters, she couldn't help but be affected. "Senior Lingxi, I don't have any intention of competing with you for anything. And don't think that my mother finding me will make her distance herself from you, or treat you coldly. You will always be with us. I treat you like an elder sister. Anyone who tries to bully you will have to get through me. So, you won't lose anything. In fact, you'll gain another person to protect you. That's a great deal, don't you think?" Lingxi looked up, gazing at the handsome face of the young man before her, his bright eyes, the corners of his mouth curling into a gentle smile. Yet, her eyes couldn't help but redden slightly. She had always been rather indifferent in her dealings with people, but this wasn't to say that it was her nature. Rather, her childhood experiences had made her highly sensitive. When she received warmth, she wanted to hold on to it tightly, not wanting to lose it. As for others, she was extremely resistant and dismissive. Although Aunt Jing wasn't her biological mother, in Lingxi's heart, she truly regarded her as a mother. She had only one such family member, and the thought of losing her terrified her. The recent days of overthinking had caused her spirits to sink, but now, as she looked at the young man before her, her emotions gradually settled, and a warm smile curved up the corners of her lips. She looked at Chen, who was slightly younger than her, with weaker strength, yet always managed to bring a sense of inexplicable peace. What a strange person. She gently smiled, her calm demeanor returning as she stretched out her fair, slender fingers and lightly tapped Chen's forehead. With a playful grin, she said, "You're much weaker than me. With this strength, how can you protect me?" Chen shrugged and chuckled. "Not now, but in the future. When I'm stronger than you, Shi, I'll protect you." As he spoke, he looked at Shi with a mischievous smile. "I didn't expect the mighty Shi to have such a childish side. It's actually pretty cute." Shi's face instantly flushed red. She knew she had made a big fool of herself, and she could only glare at Chen in embarrassment. Then, she straightened her face and said, "Do you still want to train?" Chen grinned. He knew that Shi had a thin skin. Although she wouldn't stop guiding him just because she was embarrassed, he knew not to push her too hard. After all, with her strength, she could easily handle him. "All right, we'll stop here for now. But don't say anything like that again. Although you've mastered the scroll of the Great Pagoda art, I'll never treat you like my servant. If you say that again, I might just get mad," Chen said seriously. I understand." Shi's voice was soft and gentle. In this moment, she no longer carried the authority of the third strongest of North Song's Spirit Academy. "So, how do we proceed with the training?" Chen asked. It seemed that improving his spiritual energy significantly over the next 3 months wouldn't be an easy task. She tilted her head, thinking for a moment before flashing a sweet smile. "Simple. I'll teach you the scroll of the Great Pagoda art. With that, you'll have the complete version of the Great Pagoda art. This is actually something Aunt Jing told me before she left, but she didn't have time to teach me, so she asked me to do it instead." Chen was stunned for a moment, but his heart warmed with excitement.